EDIFY means to enlighten, encourage, and uplift individuals, intellectually, morally, and spiritually. That's exactly what our EDIFY podcast guests do, as they share practical wisdom on living our faith in public. I'm Mary Fiorito. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to the EDIFY Podcast. Our guest today is Rachael Killackey, founder and executive director of Magdala Ministries, where she accompanies women on their journey towards healing from sexual addiction. She has also recently begun pursuing certification to be a sexual addiction therapy practitioner. Welcome, Rachael.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure that you could be here. So you founded Magdala Ministries, which is created to support women as they recover from addictions to pornography and to other sexual compulsions. Can you share a little bit more of your own personal story and why you founded the ministry?
Yeah, I was exposed to porn when I was 13 years old and then struggled with a subsequent addiction to porn for about 5 years after that. And then I entered recovery my sophomore year of college. I just found that there were no resources out there to help women. I looked for them for myself as a teenager and as a young woman trying to recover and trying to heal. And there's essentially nothing, especially from the Catholic standpoint. So I ended up starting a support group on my college campus with a friend of mine. And it was successful and vibrant and really, really beautiful and an incredible community. And then I kind of let it lie for a couple years and pursued grad school and a couple other career things. And then it just kind of came back up. And I was encouraged to start a larger, more virtual platform that could give access to more women.
So, that's so interesting because it's so easy. And I think most people, when they hear pornography addiction, they think about it being a men's problem.
Yeah.
And so you don't often think about women struggling with the same addiction. How does the addiction to pornography differ in women as opposed to men? Is there a difference?
There is a difference. And this is something I'm continually researching just for my own interests and just professional development. The things that men and women are attracted to in pornography tend to be different. I think the excuse given for a long time was that men are visual, women are emotional, or different things, kind of putting us in those boxes.
Right.
And there's a lot of research that actually shows that men and women are visual for different reasons. So what men and women look for in pornography, it's both visual, but for women it's more imaginative as well. So men look for just attractive actors and actresses in porn videos. And women look for videos where they can imagine themselves as one of the people in the video, right? So we like to have spaces where we can be creative, imaginative, kind of fantasize. So that's kind of what attracts more women. But then conversely, the healing looks really, really different too, which is cool. Men tend to be more motivated, I guess. There's a lot of motivation, a lot of drive, a lot of you deserve better, women deserve better, go out and kick this, kind of this appealing to that masculine strength. Right. Whereas women heal really beautifully alongside one another. There's a deep relational healing that happens when women come together for this issue. And I've found it's actually the only way they can really experience deep healing is in communion with one another.
Yeah, that's fascinating. But you in your EDIFY video, what I also found super interesting was that you compared pornography to other sorts of addictions like alcohol and drugs.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting component to it because I think some people would say that sexual addiction isn't a real addiction. What would you say?
Yeah, it's funny. It's an ongoing debate in the psych world. There's been a lot of debate about whether or not the DSM, kind of the directory of mental disorders, will include sexual addiction as a real addiction. I don't think we should wait on the DSM or the DSM-5 currently to include it in order to count it, because when you look at the neurological response to different drugs, alcohol, pornography, even things like sugar and caffeine and social media can come into those addictions as well. But it's about the dopamine release, right? What are we getting from the content we're taking in, whether that's a substance or a behavior, right? Because there's a saying in the neurological or neuroscience world, what fires together wires together. And so pornography does cause those firings almost to the same extent that alcohol and drugs do in some cases. So it does rewire your brain the same way other addictions do. So to count it out, gambling is kind of similar. Those are really...
So behavior-based.
Yeah, behavior-based.
As opposed to chemical based or
exactly. So it creates similar damage in the sense that it's that what fires together wires together.
Right. Well, so that's I think becoming even more well established within the psychiatric and psychological world. But you also have a spiritual component to your work.
Yeah.
So talk about how bringing the spiritual component of addiction recovery into Magdala Ministries, how that impacts how you heal from this kind of addiction.
Yeah, because we're primarily pastoral. So since none of us are clinical therapists, clinicians of any kind, we're primarily pastoral. I think there's a tendency in the church to want to pray our addictions away, right? We can pray this away. We can pray our problems away.
Right.
And it's not that you can pray things away, but you can't get them to go away without praying, So I think bringing in the spiritual element is more about like recognizing, kind of as the 12-step model says, like there is a God and he wants to help you.
Right.
You have to commit to doing these things yourself, and it's going to be a long road. It's not an instant fix, but there is a God who loves you, who wants to help and can help you, is powerful enough to help you. And without that surrender to him, you really can't recover. I think it's more people expect that surrender to be the end all be all, if that makes sense. So you have to have that balance of the practical and the spiritual. But yeah, you can't recover without the grace of God. It's just as you can't kick any habitual sin without the grace of God.
So pray as if everything depends on God, but work as if everything depends on you.
Yeah, essentially.
They go hand in hand. Yeah. Well, so let's talk about, now that we're onto the spiritual component. So, in the church, I would say the Christian church largely, but the Catholic Church more specifically, there is sort of a purity culture, right? I mean, we have purity rings and purity bracelets, and so you have people who are very well intentioned about keeping, what God has created to be pure, to keeping that pure. But sometimes we talk about virginity and idolize it in a way that I think, particularly for young women, impacts very negatively on the way they view human sexuality, especially in its right ordered way with your husband. So how would you suggest that we would best discuss these topics in the church?
I feel like I could rant for like 45 minutes on this. I think the messaging that I grew up with, just to kind of situate myself in the purity culture mindset for a second, the messaging that I got about sexuality, even from, as you said, very well-intentioned, good, wonderful people, was very much that men were given permission to mess up, but women weren't, if that makes sense. So the message a lot is men are visual, men are really sexual, they can't control their sex drives, they're going to watch porn, they're going to be tempted. You need to hold the line. You need to be the gatekeeper.
It's the woman who sets the standard, right?
Exactly.
That's what I remember being taught. Yeah.
Yeah, and so when you're addicted to porn as a teenage girl, you're like, am I a standard setter? Like, what do I deserve exactly? Or if you're engaged in some sort of sexual compulsion and behavior, you feel deeply ashamed of yourself because it's like, who's going to keep me safe? Right. Who's the gatekeeper? And I've found that with idolizing virginity specifically, the message that I got and that I've heard, cycled through many times since, is this is the most beautiful gift you can give your future husband, right? And when we first hear that sounds like it checks out, but on deeper examination, we kind of really realize like how problematic that is, that a physical state of being is the greatest gift we give to this person who's vowed their life to us, And so I think that message first, when it comes to sexuality, has to go, especially for women. I think the message needs to be like the greatest gift you give in a marriage or in a religious vocation or just anywhere is you. Right. It's you. You're a human being with a soul. Right. That's the greatest gift you can give anyone. Right. And so in a marriage, you vow that. And out of that, you give the gift of your sexuality to your spouse. I think that messaging also takes away the redemption of Christ in the sense of like, do we depend on this physical state of perfection or do we depend on Jesus? And we're not taking into account the fact that sometimes it's sinners who have fallen the furthest who like rise the quickest and the fastest. And, think of St. Augustine, right? Or St. Mary Magdalene, who is our patroness. She became apostle to the apostles and one of the first witnesses of the resurrection, but because she had fallen so far and then in turn received so much grace. Right. So when we're talking about sexuality, I think we have to come from that perspective first of this is a place to be loved by God no matter what you've done. And this is a place where deep healing and sanctity is possible. And that's not dependent on your perfection. That's dependent on your willingness to receive grace.
Well, what part would you say that shows like Sex and the City played in the way women view their sexuality? And, I can't think that it didn't contribute in some way to the porn culture.
Oh, yeah.
And also into sort of the hookup culture. And, sending women the message that this is the way really to live your life. And you can, as the show's intro always says, have sex just like a man and have no consequences from it. And, setting up this ridiculous standard and showing very little negative impact of that lifestyle.
Exactly.
Do you feel that particular show, it really affected women in your age group, in your cohort?
Yeah, I believe so. And there were other shows after that that I can think of, even like the show New Girl. I watched that in high school, and looking back, I'm like, I don't think I should have watched this show in high school. I think what shows like that do is, normalize objectification. So there's such a long history throughout so many different cultures. Just thousands upon thousands of years of, I guess, male sexuality dominating female sexuality, objectifying it, using it, not honoring it, suppressing it. There's a lot of suppression too.
Right.
And then when the sexual revolution hit and when we had, secular feminism kind of coming onto the scene, instead of calling men to a higher standard, which is what Alice von Hildebrand, the philosopher, kind of said was necessary at that time, but we didn't do. Instead, we believed the lie that our liberation was going to come from welcoming our objectification and from, instead of letting men be the perpetrators, instead, let's just join in and let's give the green light and let's initiate this ourselves, instead of just calling everyone to a higher standard, which women have the capability to do. So I think shows like Sex and the City or Friends or even, New Girl, I can think of several others off the top of my head. They normalize that objectification. They show women welcoming it and joining in it or even initiating it as a form of empowerment and liberation instead of setting that new standard. Right. And I think that's what happened. Is it didn't necessarily normalize hooking up, because it's not like all of these young Catholic women wanted to imitate Carrie Bradshaw. It was more like it equated it with empowerment. And that's a lie that's really easy to sell.
I think that hits the nail on the head perfectly. Well, if you had one piece of advice to share with either men or women who are struggling with this, with pornography addiction, what would you tell them?
Oof.
What's your elevator speech for,
I'd say it's about the long game. I think in my own recovery and then in my ministry, what I've seen is just sometimes when we're struggling with addiction, we get addicted to finding this perfect answer, this perfect cocktail or the silver bullet of healing. One of my favorite quotes is from a theologian who said, trust in the slow work of God above all. And I think that's what I would say is it's about the long game. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And it takes time to heal.
Because your brain has to heal. As you pointed out, your brain's changed. And so you need to kind of get your brain back to the way it was.
Your spirit and your body, all of it. Yeah, it takes time. And so just invest in the time and be patient with yourself. Do your best. I mean, that's not to say make excuses for yourself. Frequent the sacraments. The confessional is your friend, not your enemy. Nothing keeps you more accountable than the confessional, especially if you can go to the same priests. That's huge. Or do face-to-face confession. That can be amazing. But invest in the long term. Don't try to find short-term fix in sobriety. It's about long-term intimacy with God.
Well, then, so to just unpack that a little bit, what are some practical things that people who want to start this long journey, want to start this marathon, what are a couple of things that you would recommend that they start with, and what do they do if they want to just begin this road to healing?
Sure. The first is if you're not going to confession, go and go frequently. The second is learn your triggers. Learn what emotions, circumstances, people, relationships trigger you and make you seek out porn or other sexual compulsions. Because once you know your triggers, you can learn to respond to them and get people who will help you.
Well, what are some common triggers, especially for women, since that's what you normally do speak on?
Women, I've found the most common ones are stress and loneliness. Yeah, stress and loneliness are pretty huge. Boredom can be another one, or like a certain curiosity. Also, their menstrual cycle. Women's menstrual cycles are heavily tied to their sexual temptation. So for women, part of knowing triggers is tracking your cycle and learning about the effects on your hormones.
During your fertile period, I am to assume that's when your temptations may be greater.
Yeah, it can spike for a ton of women, kind of unexplained in their minds, but it's a very easy explanation when you look at charts. But find people who can help you address those triggers in a healthy way, whether that's an accountability partner, a support group, a therapist. Nobody can get through by themselves. Nobody can heal long-term by themselves.
Yeah. So it's kind of almost like a 12-step model without calling it a 12-step model. So, well, finally, you're expecting your first baby. And so how do you see your mission and what you're doing and your perspective? How has that changed since your daughter joined you?
Oof. Yeah, I think the fact that it is a little girl makes an impact when I think about this. I think I see already, and I know I'm only going to taste this more and more and more as she enters the world, just how parents are in a position of a certain powerlessness, like just doing the absolute best they can, right? It gives me a lot of compassion for my own parents. If they did the best they could, raising me in the faith, they're incredible people, right? And so I'm going to do the absolute best I can. But what my parents gave me and what I want to give my daughter is safety. And is a mother who they know loves them no matter what they do. So I think that it's kind of given me that lens from a parent perspective, but it's also it's given me a lot of gentleness. I think I'm able to see the women in Magdala from a much more maternal standpoint, I guess, a standpoint of spiritual motherhood that I've been praying for and that I've had in the past. But it's like each one who comes for help feels like another daughter. Like that's what it's feeling like, where I'm like, oh, like I just want to love you and I want you to feel safe. So I think reflecting on that, and that, yes, I have my own biological daughter, thank God, but this woman who may be in her 30s or 40s or 50s who's coming to me for help is somebody else's daughter. And so I need to treat her that way. It's given me a tenderness, I guess.
Yeah. Well, Rachael, thank you for your courage in sharing your testimony. First of all, I don't know many young women who would do the kind of thing that you're doing and doing it so publicly, but it's clearly helping so many people, because I mean, that's one of Satan's greatest lies, right? That you're the only one. And you're the only one who's got this problem, and boy, you know, so thank you for giving all sorts of women, I'm sure young and old, the example and the knowledge that they're not alone. And I think that's the way the devil isolates us and tempts us further. Yeah. So, and thank you for helping us edify Catholics so that we can together edify America.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. To make it easier for you to listen to future EDIFY Podcast episodes, please make sure you subscribe over at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Thank you.